The Vraxian fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the solar system. 300 warships, each one larger than the biggest human aircraft carrier, hung in the darkness of space like predators surrounding wounded prey. Admiral Krathvon stood on the bridge of his flagship, his 4 eyes scanning the primitive star system ahead. This was conquest number 848. He had done this so many times that the process had become boring. His tactical officer approached, his scaled skin reflecting the blue light from the control panels. "Admiral, we have completed our scans of the third planet. The inhabitants call it Earth. Our initial reports were correct. They are a primitive species. They have nuclear fission, some basic satellites, and fragmented political groups. No unified planetary government, no energy shields, no plasma weapons. This will be easy." Krathvon made a rumbling sound that was the Vraxian equivalent of laughter. How many times have we heard that? Every conquest starts the same way. Send the standard surrender message. Tell them they have 72 hours to submit to Vraxian rule. Inform them that resistance will result in the destruction of their major population centers. Use translation protocols Alpha through Gamma. These primitive species usually understand at least one of them. The communications officer worked at his station, sending the message toward the blue and green planet in the distance. The message was simple and had been used on hundreds of worlds before. Submit or die. Give us your resources. Give us your people. Become part of the Vraxian Dominion or be erased from existence. It was a message that had worked every single time for 3,000 years. On Earth, the message arrived simultaneously at every government facility, every military base, and every communications hub. Radio stations went silent mid-broadcast. Television channels displayed strange symbols. Internet connections flickered and then showed the same alien text. The message translated itself into every human language, appearing in English, Mandarin, Spanish, Arabic, Hindi, and thousands of others. In the United Nations building in New York, delegates stared at screens in stunned silence. In the Pentagon, generals grabbed phones and started making calls. In Moscow, Beijing, London, Paris, and Delhi, leaders gathered their advisors. For the first few hours, humanity did what it had always done when faced with something new and terrifying. They argued. They debated. They pointed fingers at each other and blamed past conflicts. But something else was happening too. Something the Vraxians had never encountered before. In homes across the planet, families gathered around their screens. In cities and villages, in deserts and mountains in every corner of Earth, humans looked up at the sky and felt something ancient stirring in their blood. It was not fear, though fear was there. It was not anger, though anger was building. It was something deeper, something that had been written into human DNA over millions of years of survival. Humanity had evolved on a world that tried to kill them every single day. They had survived ice ages that should have frozen them to extinction. They had endured droughts that turned fertile lands into wastelands. They had lived through plagues that killed half their population and then rebuilt. They had faced predators with bigger teeth, stronger muscles, and natural armor, and they had won by being smarter, more creative, and too stubborn to give up. The Vraxians monitored Earth's communications, listening to the confused chatter between governments. Admiral Krathvon smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. They are arguing among themselves. Perfect. Division makes conquest easier. They will waste time fighting each other while we prepare our landing forces. But then, something changed. The human communications went silent. Not the silence of defeat, but the silence of a predator that had stopped running and turned to face the thing chasing it. In war rooms across the planet, old enemies looked at each other and made a decision that would have seemed impossible just hours before. The President of the United States picked up a secure phone line to Moscow. The Premier of China contacted Delhi. The European Union reached out to Africa. The Middle East, torn by decades of conflict, found common ground. In less than 24 hours, humanity did what it had never fully accomplished in its entire history. They united, not through treaties or diplomatic negotiations, but through something more fundamental. Every human on Earth understood in that moment that their differences meant nothing compared to the threat hanging in their sky. They were not Americans or Chinese or Europeans or Africans or Asians. They were humans. They were Earth's children, and someone had just threatened their home. The response that went back to the Vraxian fleet was not what Admiral Krathvon expected. It was not a surrender. It was not a plea for mercy. It was 6 words in clear translated Vraxian. Come and take it if you can. Krathvon stared at the message in disbelief. In 847 conquests, no species had ever responded with defiance. Fear, yes. Attempts at negotiation, certainly. Even desperate attacks from species that knew they would lose. But never simple, clear defiance. Never a challenge. They do not understand, Krathvon said to his officers. They do not know what we are capable of. They think their primitive weapons can harm us. We will teach them. Prepare the fleet for orbital bombardment. Target their military installations first. Show them that resistance is futile. The Vraxian fleet moved closer to Earth, taking up positions in high orbit. Their weapons charged massive arrays capable of turning mountains into glass. But as they moved into position, something else was happening on the planet below. Factories that had been making cars and computers began retooling to make weapons. Scientists who had been studying medicine and climate began working on military applications. Civilians who had never held a gun received basic training. Hackers who had been stealing credit card numbers turned their skills toward penetrating alien computer systems. Somewhere in the vast bureaucracy of the Galactic Council, an ancient race called the Archivists received notification of the Vraxian invasion of Earth. The Archivists were observers, a species so old that they remembered when the Vraxians were still learning to make fire. They had watched thousands of civilizations rise and fall. They had sworn never to interfere in the natural development of younger species. But when they saw that the target was Earth, something unprecedented happened. The eldest of the Archivists, a being who had lived for 50,000 years, broke their sacred vow of silence. They sent a message to the Galactic Council, a message that would be ignored until it was too late. The message said, "You have made a terrible mistake. You have attacked a species that evolved through persistence hunting. You have threatened the descendants of the only predator on their world that could chase prey until it died of exhaustion. You have awakened something that should have been left alone. May the stars have mercy on your souls." But the message arrived too late. The Vraxian fleet was already in position. Admiral Krathvon gave the order to begin the bombardment. The invasion of Earth had begun. The Vraxians expected victory in 72 hours. They had no idea that they had just started a war that would change the galaxy forever. They had no idea that humanity's greatest strength was not their weapons or their technology. It was their absolute refusal to give up, no matter what the odds, no matter how long it took, no matter how much it cost. The hunt had begun, but the Vraxians had made one fatal error. They assumed they were the hunters. The first Vraxian bombardment struck military bases across Earth. Missiles from orbit turned installations into craters. The base at Diego Garcia vanished in a flash of superheated plasma. The naval yards at Norfolk burned. Air Force facilities in Colorado disappeared under walls of fire. The Vraxians calculated that destroying military infrastructure first would break human resistance. They had used this strategy on every world they conquered. But within the Galactic Council chambers, thousands of light years away, something unusual was happening. Species that normally never spoke to each other were gathering in small groups, whispering nervously. The archivists had sent their warning, and those who knew Earth's history were beginning to panic. The Catherine ambassador, whose species had been studying Earth for centuries without making contact, stood before the council. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "We must stop the Vraxians immediately. They do not understand what they have done. Earth is classified as a Class 12 death world. Do you understand what that means? Class 12. Only 5 known planets in the galaxy have that classification. The gravity alone would crush most of our species. The atmospheric oxygen levels are toxic to 80% of council members. The microbial life would kill most of us within days." A Vraxian counselor, a cousin of Admiral Krathvon, laughed at this. "So they evolved on a dangerous world. That means nothing. Danger does not equal military strength. Our scans show primitive technology. No energy shields. No antimatter weapons. No faster-than-light capability. They are centuries behind us." The Catherine ambassador's skin changed color, a sign of extreme distress in her species. "You are not listening. Let me tell you about humans. Their planet tried to kill them every single day for 3 million years. They survived ice ages that froze entire continents. They survived volcanic eruptions that blocked out their sun for years. They survived plagues that killed half their population, and every single time they came back stronger." She activated a holographic display showing human evolution. "Look at their history. They are persistence hunters. Do you know what that means? Their ancestors would select an animal, sometimes something much larger and stronger than themselves, and they would chase it. Not for minutes or hours, but for days. They would chase it until it collapsed from exhaustion and overheating. Then they would kill it and eat it. That is how they became the dominant species on their planet. Another council member, a floating gas being from a low-gravity world, pulsed with confusion. That hunting method seems inefficient. Why not use strength or speed? The Catherine ambassador's eyes widened. Because they did not have strength or speed. They had something better. They had endurance. They had the ability to keep going long after every other creature gave up. They had the intelligence to track, to plan, to coordinate, and most terrifying of all, they had the absolute refusal to quit. Ever. She changed the holographic display to show human history. Look at their wars. They fight each other constantly. They have been at war for their entire recorded history. They developed weapons that could destroy their own planet, and they came within minutes of using them multiple times. They created something called nuclear weapons 70 years ago. Do you understand? 70 years. That is nothing. We have species in this council that took 10,000 years to develop similar technology. Humans did it in 70 years while fighting a global war at the same time. The Vraxian counselor was no longer laughing. Surely you exaggerate. I wish I was, the Catherine ambassador said quietly. Let me tell you about human medicine. When they get sick, they do not simply accept death like most species. They cut themselves open and repair their internal organs. They poison themselves with toxic chemicals to kill diseases. They expose themselves to radiation to burn away cancers. They replace their failing organs with mechanical pumps. They do these things routinely. Pain and suffering that would cause most species to choose death, humans consider minor inconvenience. She pulled up more data. They climb mountains that have thin air and freezing temperatures for recreation. They jump out of flying aircraft with fabric parachutes for entertainment. They fight each other in organized combat sports where the goal is to render your opponent unconscious. They run marathons, which is a race that covers 42 kilometers, and they do it for fun. Some of them do even longer races running for 24 hours straight through deserts and mountains. The council chamber had grown very quiet. The Catherine ambassador continued, her voice growing more urgent. But here is the most important thing you need to understand about humans. They are a fractured species. They have hundreds of nations, thousands of cultures, and they fight among themselves constantly. They have never truly united as a single species, but the Vraxians just gave them a reason to unite. The Vraxians just threatened their homeworld, their planet, the place where their ancestors are buried, the place where their children live. She paused, letting that sink in. There is a human saying, "Do not wake the sleeping dragon." The Vraxians just did more than wake it. They poked it with a stick. Back on Earth, the Vraxian bombardment had stopped after 6 hours. Admiral Krathvon was pleased with the results. All major military installations had been destroyed or severely damaged. Human air forces were grounded. Naval fleets were burning. The pathway was clear for ground forces to land and begin occupation. Everything was going according to plan. Begin landing operations, Krathvon ordered. Deploy forces to major population centers. Priority targets are New York, Moscow, Beijing, London, Tokyo, and Delhi. Establish control zones. Begin harvesting operations within 48 hours. Vraxian dropships entered Earth's atmosphere, carrying thousands of soldiers in powered armor. They had energy weapons that could punch through concrete. They had personal shields that could deflect human bullets. They had scanners that could see through walls. They were conquerors who had successfully occupied hundreds of worlds. They expected Earth to be the same. The dropships landed in city centers and Vraxian soldiers emerged. In Times Square, crowds scattered as alien troops marched forward. In Red Square, civilians ran as dropships blocked out the sky. In Tiananmen Square, the ancient stones cracked under the weight of alien war machines. The Vraxians set up command posts and declared martial law. They expected humans to hide in their homes and wait for instructions, but something was different. The humans were not panicking the way conquered species usually did. They were watching, learning, taking notes, recording everything on their communication devices. The Vraxians thought this was primitive behavior, the actions of a species that did not understand their situation. In military bunkers buried deep underground, bunkers that had survived the orbital bombardment, human commanders watched the landing operations through hidden cameras. They saw the Vraxian armor. They saw the energy weapons. They saw the shields. and they started planning. "We cannot match their technology," an American general said to his Chinese and Russian counterparts over a secure quantum-encrypted line. "But we do not need to match it. We need to survive it long enough to adapt." "Agreed," the Russian commander replied. "They expect us to fight them head-on. We will not give them that fight. We will make them hunt us through every street, every building, every sewer. We will make them pay for every meter of ground. They have better weapons," the Chinese general added. "But weapons are just tools. Wars are won by the will to keep fighting, and we have something they do not have. We have millions of years of evolution that taught us how to survive when we should have died." Around the world, humans were not surrendering. They were adapting. In Tokyo, engineers were already examining debris from crashed Vraxian drones. In Mumbai, hackers were analyzing captured Vraxian communication signals. In São Paulo, chemists were testing Vraxian materials for weaknesses. In Lagos, mechanics were learning how Vraxian power systems worked. The Vraxians had made a crucial mistake. They had given humanity something to study, and humans were very, very good at learning from their enemies. In the Galactic Council, the Catherine ambassador sent one final message to the Vraxian fleet. It was marked urgent, but Admiral Krathavon never saw it. His communications officers dismissed it as propaganda. The message was simple: retreat now while you still can. You have started something you cannot finish. Humans do not surrender. They do not give up. They will fight you with everything they have, and when they run out of weapons, they will fight you with their bare hands. And they will win, because winning is what they have done for 3 million years. But the message went unread. The occupation had begun, and humanity was about to teach the galaxy what it meant to fight a species that evolved by refusing to die. The first week of occupation went exactly as Admiral Krathavon had planned. Vraxian forces controlled the major cities. Human military resistance had been crushed or gone underground. The aliens established checkpoints and began cataloging resources. Victory seemed certain. The Dominion was already planning how to divide Earth's wealth among the noble houses. Then the problems started. It began small. A Vraxian patrol in Moscow reported that their command post had been sabotaged during the night. Someone had cut their power lines and contaminated their water supply. The soldiers had spent the night in darkness, unable to use their advanced equipment. When they went to investigate, an elderly human woman appeared from a nearby apartment building. She was small, wrinkled, and carrying a pot of boiling water. She threw it at the patrol leader, screaming words in Russian that the translators rendered as something about her grandchildren. The boiling water did nothing to the Vraxian's armor, but the patrol leader was so shocked that he froze. A human with no weapons, no armor, and no chance of winning had just attacked a fully armed alien soldier. The patrol retreated and requested backup. The old woman was arrested, but the story spread through the Vraxian forces like wildfire. The humans were not acting like a conquered people. They were acting like they had already won, and just did not know it yet. In Tokyo, Vraxian engineers tried to shut down the human power grid to force compliance. The humans simply rerouted power through backup systems the Vraxians did not know existed. When those were found and destroyed, the humans fixed them overnight. When the Vraxians destroyed them again, the humans had them working again by morning. It became a game that the Vraxians could not win. They would destroy infrastructure during the day, and humans would rebuild it at night. The aliens needed sleep. The humans seemed to operate on spite and coffee. In New York City, the Resistance discovered something important about Vraxian biology. The aliens had evolved on a clean, carefully managed world. Their immune systems had never dealt with the concentrated filth of an Earth city. The sewers, which humans considered unpleasant but manageable, were toxic to Vraxian biology. The smell alone made them sick. The bacteria caused infections. The waste was literally poisonous to them. So the human resistance moved into the sewers. They set up camps in tunnels that the Vraxians could not enter without becoming violently ill. They launched attacks from storm drains and maintenance tunnels. They used the city's underground infrastructure like a massive bunker system. The Vraxians controlled the surface, but humans owned everything beneath it. A Vraxian commander sent a report back to the fleet. The humans are using their own waste systems as military infrastructure. We cannot pursue them without serious health risks. Request chemical decontamination units and biohazard suits rated for Class 12 Death World environments. Admiral Krathavon read the report with growing frustration. Biohazard suits for a sewer system? This was not how conquests were supposed to go. Conquered species were supposed to surrender, to accept their new rulers, to be grateful for Vraxian civilization. They were not supposed to live in sewage and conduct guerrilla warfare, but it got worse. Much worse. The human attacks followed no pattern that Vraxian military doctrine could predict. On Earth, warfare had evolved over thousands of years into something terrifyingly efficient. Humans understood tactics that the Vraxians had never encountered. They knew how to use terrain. They knew how to blend into civilian populations. They knew how to strike fast and disappear before reinforcements arrived. In Paris, a Vraxian patrol was ambushed using nothing but Molotov cocktails and homemade explosives. The aliens' shields could stop energy weapons and bullets, but nobody had thought to test them against burning alcohol in glass bottles. 3 Vraxian soldiers died and the rest were injured. The humans responsible vanished into the metro tunnels before air support could arrive. In Beijing, hackers penetrated Vraxian communication networks and started sending false orders. Patrols were directed to wrong locations. Supply shipments were rerouted. Command posts received contradictory instructions. The Vraxian military, which relied heavily on centralized computer systems, began to fall apart. Commanders could not trust their own communications. They had to send physical messengers, which slowed everything down. But the worst problem was the one that Admiral Krathvon had not anticipated at all. The humans were learning. Every piece of Vraxian technology that was captured or salvaged was immediately taken apart and studied. In underground laboratories, human scientists worked around the clock to understand alien engineering. They did not need to fully comprehend it. They just needed to figure out how to break it, disable it, or use it against its creators. A human in Mumbai discovered that Vraxian energy weapons used a specific frequency that could be disrupted by a modified microwave oven. The information spread through the resistance networks in hours. Suddenly, every Vraxian soldier on Earth was vulnerable to attacks using household appliances. Their most advanced weapons could be rendered useless by human technology that was 50 years old. In Sao Paulo, engineers figured out how to hotwire Vraxian power cells and use them to run human equipment. The aliens used a form of antimatter containment that was far beyond human understanding, but the humans did not need to understand it. They just needed to know which wires to connect to make it work. Within days, human resistance fighters were using captured Vraxian power sources to charge their phones, run their computers, and power their weapons. The Vraxians started to realize they were not fighting a military. They were fighting an entire planet of people who had spent their whole evolution learning how to turn everything into a weapon. A human with a rock was dangerous. A human with a stick was lethal. A human with access to a hardware store was absolutely terrifying. But the psychological warfare was even worse than the physical attacks. Humans understood something that the Vraxians did not. War was not just about weapons and territory. It was about breaking the enemy's will to fight. And humans had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of psychological warfare. Vraxian soldiers began reporting strange occurrences. They would return to their barracks to find small changes. Personal items moved. Equipment tampered with but not broken. Messages written in languages they could not read. The humans were sending a message: "We can reach you anywhere, anytime. You are never safe. You will never rest," and it worked. Vraxian soldiers stopped sleeping properly. They jumped at shadows. They fired at civilians who were just going about their day. The stress of constant vigilance began to break them down. Their commanders tried to maintain discipline, but it was hard to stay disciplined when you knew that the local population wanted you dead and was willing to wait years for the perfect opportunity. A psychiatric report from the Vraxian fleet medical officer painted a grim picture. Soldiers are experiencing severe stress disorders. Symptoms include paranoia, insomnia, anxiety attacks, and loss of combat effectiveness. Recommend immediate rotation of ground forces and extended rest periods. However, we do not have sufficient reserves to maintain occupation with regular troop rotations. Request reinforcements from the Dominion. Admiral Krathvon stared at the report in disbelief. His soldiers were breaking down after just 3 months. 3 months. He had commanded occupation forces that had held planets for decades without these problems. What was different about Earth? The answer was simple, though Krathvon did not understand it yet. The Vraxians had conquered hundreds of worlds, but they had always conquered species that accepted defeat when they were clearly beaten. Species that understood when resistance was futile. Species that valued their own survival more than their pride. Humans were different. Humans had a saying that the Vraxians would soon learn. I did not hear no bell. It meant that the fight was not over until humans decided it was over. And humans had decided that the fight would continue until every single Vraxian left Earth or died, trying to stay. In the underground bunkers where human resistance leaders coordinated their efforts, a new plan was forming. They had survived the initial invasion. They had learned from the enemy. They had adapted their tactics. Now it was time for the next phase. It was time to stop defending and start attacking. A former NATO general spoke to resistance leaders from every nation on Earth through encrypted channels. We have fought well, but we have only been surviving. Now we take the fight to them. We have their weapons. We have their technology. We have their communication codes. And most importantly, we have something they will never have. We have a reason to fight that goes beyond conquest or glory. We are fighting for our home, for our families, for our future, and we will not stop until they leave or until there is not a single human left alive to resist. The message was met with grim agreement from every resistance cell on the planet. The Vraxians thought they had conquered Earth. They were about to learn that occupying human territory was very different from conquering it. The real war was just beginning. 6 months into the occupation, the human counteroffensive began in a way that would be studied by military strategists across the galaxy for generations. It started not with a massive battle, but with a single captured Vraxian transport ship in the Australian outback. A team of human engineers, soldiers, and one particularly brilliant teenager from Sydney had spent 3 months studying every detail of the crashed vessel. They had no formal training in alien technology. They had no instruction manuals. They had no idea what half the systems actually did, but they had something more valuable: human stubbornness and the ability to learn by trial and error. This conduit connects to the power system. The teenager, whose name was Emma and who had been studying aerospace engineering before the invasion, pointed at a tangle of crystalline wires. If we bypass these 3 nodes and reroute through the secondary manifold, we can get the engines running. Probably. Probably? An Australian Army engineer asked, raising an eyebrow. Emma shrugged. I mean, there is a 30% chance we blow ourselves up, but there is a 70% chance we can fly this thing. I like those odds. Bloody hell, the engineer muttered. You're insane, kid. Yeah, but I am the insane kid who figured out how to hack Vraxian shield generators using a car battery and a laptop. So maybe trust me on this one. They did trust her. Because in the 6 months since the invasion began, humanity had learned something important. Age and credentials meant nothing anymore. What mattered was results. Emma got results. She had personally designed 17 different ways to disable Vraxian equipment using human technology. She was 17 years old and had become one of the most valuable assets in the resistance. The engines roared to life on the 3rd attempt. The 2nd attempt had resulted in a small explosion that singed everyone's eyebrows, but nobody was seriously hurt. Emma whooped with joy and started running system diagnostics. Within an hour, they had a functional Vraxian transport ship under human control. This changed everything. The information was immediately transmitted to every resistance cell on Earth. If humans could fly one Vraxian ship, they could fly more. The hunt for crashed, damaged, or abandoned Vraxian vessels became a priority operation. Within weeks, humanity had pieced together a small fleet of captured ships. They were not pretty. They were held together with human welding, earth metals, and what the engineers cheerfully called hope and duct tape. But they flew. Meanwhile, human scientists achieved another breakthrough. A team in Switzerland, working in an underground laboratory that had once been used for particle physics research, figured out how Vraxian plasma weapons worked. More importantly, they figured out how to make them using Earth materials and manufacturing processes. The weapons were crude compared to Vraxian originals. They overheated quickly. They had half the range. They needed to be recharged after every 20 shots, but they worked. And humanity had thousands of factories that could make them. The Vraxians had technology. Humans had industrial capacity. It turned out that was a fair trade. Admiral Krathvon received these reports with growing alarm. The humans were supposed to be defeated. They were supposed to be broken. Instead, they were reverse engineering Vraxian technology faster than his intelligence officers believed possible. He called an emergency meeting with his command staff. Explain to me, Krathvon said slowly. his 4 eyes glowing with barely controlled anger. How a primitive species with no faster-than-light capability is successfully copying our weapons technology in less than one standard cycle. His chief scientist, a Vraxian who had 3 advanced degrees and 40 years of research experience, looked uncomfortable. "Admiral, I do not have a good explanation. According to all our models, it should be impossible. The humans lack the theoretical framework to understand our technology. They do not have the manufacturing capabilities. They do not have the material science. But somehow they are doing it anyway." "How?" Krathvon demanded. The scientist pulled up a holographic display showing human research methods. "They are not trying to understand our technology, Admiral. They are treating it like a puzzle. They take it apart. They test each component. They figure out what each piece does through trial and error. Then they find ways to replicate the results using their own technology. It is incredibly inefficient, and they lose researchers regularly to accidents. But they do not seem to care. For every human who dies in an experiment, 10 more volunteer to continue the work." Krathvon stared at the display in horror. "They are sacrificing their own people to learn our technology?" "Not sacrificing, Admiral. The deaths are accidental, but yes, they continue despite casualties. I estimate they have lost several thousand researchers to laboratory accidents. They consider it acceptable losses." "That is insane," Krathvon whispered. "What species considers thousands of deaths acceptable losses in scientific research?" His tactical officer spoke up quietly. "A species that evolved on a Class 12 death world, Admiral. The Catherine tried to warn us. Humans do not calculate risk the way we do. They calculate acceptable losses. As long as some humans survive to continue the work, they consider the sacrifice worthwhile." The truth of this statement was proven when humanity launched its first major counteroffensive. It happened in Earth's orbit, where the Vraxian fleet maintained a blockade. 50 human ships cobbled together from captured Vraxian technology and Earth materials, launched from hidden bases. They were crewed by volunteers who had trained for exactly 3 weeks on systems they barely understood. The Vraxian fleet had 300 warships. By all tactical calculations, the human attack should have been suicide. It was suicide. But humans had spent their entire history learning that sometimes suicide missions were necessary. Sometimes the only way to win was to be willing to die for the cause. The human ships did not try to fight a traditional space battle. They used tactics that had never been seen in galactic warfare: ramming maneuvers, nuclear mines attached to asteroids and hurled at Vraxian vessels, coordinated strikes where 5 human ships would sacrifice themselves to destroy 1 Vraxian cruiser. It was brutal, inefficient, and absolutely terrifying to watch. A Vraxian ship captain sent a panicked transmission to Admiral Krathvon. "They are using their own ships as missiles. They are deliberately crashing into us. These are not military tactics. This is insanity." But it was working. The Vraxian fleet was designed to fight other fleets using energy weapons and tactical maneuvers. They were not designed to fight an enemy that treated their own lives as ammunition. Within 3 hours, the humans had destroyed or disabled 40 Vraxian vessels. The human fleet was completely destroyed, but they had achieved their objective. They had proven that the Vraxian fleet was vulnerable. More importantly, they had captured 5 Vraxian ships mostly intact. Those ships were immediately taken to hidden bases where human engineers began the process of learning, adapting, and improving. The 47,000 humans who died in the attack became heroes. Their sacrifice was mourned, but it was also celebrated. They had died fighting for Earth. In human culture, that was the greatest honor possible. On the ground, the resistance launched simultaneous attacks across every occupied city. In London, an underground bunker beneath the old tube system housed a command center that coordinated resistance operations across Europe. The plan was simple: hit the Vraxians everywhere at once. Do not give them time to respond or reinforce. In Berlin, human fighters emerged from the sewers and attacked a Vraxian supply depot. They used captured plasma weapons and homemade explosives. The attack lasted 15 minutes before they vanished back underground. The Vraxians sent reinforcements, but by the time they arrived, the humans were gone. The pattern repeated in Paris, Rome, Madrid, and Warsaw. Hit fast. Hit hard. Disappear. In Asia, the tactics were different but equally effective. In Beijing, hackers launched a cyber attack that shut down Vraxian communications across the entire continent for 6 hours. During that blackout, Resistance cells struck at isolated Vraxian outposts. Without communication, without coordination, the outposts fell one by one. By the time the Vraxians restored their networks, they had lost control of half of China. In Mumbai, a group of engineers had built something special. They called it the equalizer. It was a device that generated an electromagnetic pulse specifically tuned to disable Vraxian shields. It was bulky, required a massive power source, and could only be used once before burning out. But it worked. A team of volunteers carried one into a Vraxian command center on their backs, activated it, and then attacked with conventional weapons. The Vraxian shields failed, and without their technological advantage, the aliens discovered that humans were very, very good at close-quarters combat. Admiral Krathvon watched his empire crumble in real time. Every report brought worse news. Casualties mounting, territories lost, supply lines disrupted, and worst of all, his soldiers were losing the will to fight. They signed up to conquer primitive species, not to fight persistence hunters who used their own bodies as weapons. He sent a desperate message to the Vraxian Dominion, requesting immediate reinforcements and permission to retreat. We cannot hold Earth. The humans are not a primitive species. They are a warrior species that has been holding back their true capabilities. Every day we remain, we lose more. The news of the incoming Vraxian fleet reached Earth through intercepted communications. 2,000 warships, the entire remaining strength of the Vraxian Dominion. It was enough firepower to turn entire planets into asteroids. Every human on Earth knew what this meant. This was the final battle, win or die. In command bunkers across the planet, military leaders faced an impossible decision. They had maybe 300 functional ships, most of them barely spaceworthy. They had weapons that were reverse-engineered copies of alien technology. They had crews that had weeks of training instead of years. Against 2,000 Vraxian warships, their chances of victory were essentially zero. A general in the deep bunker beneath Colorado spoke the truth that everyone was thinking. We cannot win this fight. Not conventionally. We need to do something they will not expect. Like what? Asked a Chinese admiral over the secure channel. We have already thrown everything at them. Suicide attacks, guerrilla warfare, cyber attacks. They know all our tricks now. Then we need new tricks, said a Russian commander. We need to think like humans, not like military officers. What would a crazy human do in this situation? There was a long silence on the channel. Then a voice spoke up. It was Emma, the teenager, from Australia who had figured out how to fly Vraxian ships. She was not supposed to be on this channel, but she had hacked her way in because she had an idea. Sorry to interrupt, but I have been thinking about this problem. The Vraxians have 2,000 ships. We have 300. Those are bad odds. But what if we change the battlefield? What if we do not fight them in space? What do you mean? The American general asked. The asteroid belt, Emma said. It is between Mars and Jupiter. Thousands of asteroids, some of them kilometers across. Lots of rocks, lots of places to hide, lots of things to use as weapons. If we can lure them into the belt and fight them there, their numbers become less important. They cannot bring all 2,000 ships to bear at once. They will have to split up, and we can use the asteroids themselves as weapons. An Indian scientist on the channel spoke up. That could work, but how do we lure them in? They will see it as a trap. We make it irresistible, Emma replied. We fake a retreat. We make it look like we are running scared. We head for the asteroid belt and broadcast distress signals. We make them think we are cornered. And then when they follow us in, we show them what humans can do when we are fighting in an environment we choose. The plan was insane. It was desperate. It had maybe a 10% chance of success. But 10% was better than zero, and humans had won with worse odds before. The decision was made. Earth would make its stand in the asteroid belt. Over the next 3 weeks, humanity prepared for the battle that would determine their future. Every ship that could fly was equipped with nuclear weapons, not sophisticated antimatter bombs or plasma missiles, but good old-fashioned nuclear warheads. Humanity had thousands of them, relics from the Cold War that had been kept in storage for decades. Now they would finally serve their original purpose, defending Earth from an existential threat. Engineers worked around the clock to attach engines to the largest asteroids in the belt. They did not need to move them fast, just enough to position them strategically. Asteroids became floating fortresses, hiding human ships and weapons. Others became mines, waiting to be pushed into the path of Vraxian vessels. And then, the Vraxian fleet arrived. 2,000 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the solar system. It was the largest military fleet ever assembled in galactic history. The combined firepower could sterilize a dozen planets. Admiral Krathvon stood on his flagship, surrounded by the ships of 20 noble houses. This was the moment of triumph. This was when humanity would finally be crushed. "Scan for human vessels," he ordered. "Detecting multiple contacts, Admiral," his sensor officer reported. "They appear to be retreating toward the inner system. Wait, they are heading for the asteroid belt between the 4th and 5th planets." Krathvon smiled, showing his sharp teeth. "They are running. They think the asteroids will give them cover. Foolish. We will simply destroy every asteroid until they have nowhere to hide. Pursue them. All ships, maintain formation. We end this today." The massive fleet moved forward following the fleeing human ships. It took hours to reach the asteroid belt, but the Vraxians were in no hurry. There was no escape for humanity. This was the end. As the Vraxian fleet entered the asteroid belt, Krathvon felt his first moment of doubt. His sensors were showing thousands of asteroids, many of them large enough to hide ships. His fleet was forced to spread out to navigate through them. The perfect formation was breaking apart. But it did not matter. They still outnumbered the humans 6-1. Then the asteroids started moving. The first indication something was wrong came when a Vraxian cruiser reported that an asteroid had changed course and was heading directly toward them. Before they could react, the asteroid impacted the ship at thousands of kilometers per hour. The cruiser was destroyed instantly. Then another asteroid moved, and another, and another. They put engines on the asteroids. A Vraxian captain screamed over the communication channel. "They are using them as weapons." Admiral Krathvon stared, in horror as his fleet was bombarded by rocks the size of mountains. His ship's weapons could destroy the asteroids, but there were thousands of them. And while his forces were focused on the asteroids, the human ships attacked from hiding. The human tactics were brutal and efficient. They would hide behind an asteroid, wait for a Vraxian ship to pass, then emerge and fire everything they had at point-blank range. Nuclear missiles, plasma weapons, and in some cases just ramming the Vraxian vessels with their own ships set to self-destruct. Each human ship that died took at least one Vraxian ship with it, sometimes more. But the most terrifying weapon was still to come. Deep in the asteroid belt, human engineers had been working on a special project. They had found an asteroid made almost entirely of iron and nickel. It was 3 kilometers across and massed trillions of tons. They had attached every engine they could salvage to it and aimed it at the center of the Vraxian fleet. A dying human pilot, her ship crippled but her communication still working, broadcast a final message to the Vraxian fleet. "You should have left us alone. Now you are going to learn why you do not threaten a species that throws rocks for fun." The massive asteroid accelerated. The Vraxians saw it coming and fired everything they had at it. Energy weapons carved chunks off its surface. Missiles detonated in massive explosions. But the asteroid was too big, moving too fast. It plowed through the center of the Vraxian formation like a bowling ball through pins. Dozens of ships were destroyed by the impact. Hundreds more were damaged by debris. The Vraxian fleet fell into chaos. Ships collided with asteroids. Friendly fire incidents became common as sensors were overwhelmed by debris. Commanders lost contact with their subordinates. The carefully planned battle became a confused brawl in 3 dimensions, with asteroids and wreckage everywhere. And in that chaos, humanity was winning. Not because they had better ships or better weapons, but because they had spent 6 months learning how to fight an enemy that was stronger than them. They knew how to use terrain. They knew how to sacrifice. They knew how to turn disadvantages into advantages. Admiral Krathvon watched his fleet die. Half his ships were gone. A quarter were damaged. The rest were scattered across millions of cubic kilometers of space. and the humans just kept coming like some kind of nightmare that refused to end. He gave the order he had never thought he would give. All ships retreat. Fall back to Rally Point Gamma. We cannot win this. But humanity did not let them retreat in peace. Human ships pursued the fleeing Vraxians, harassing them every kilometer of the way. Small human vessels would dart in, fire their weapons, and escape before the Vraxians could respond. It was persistence hunting on an interstellar scale. The humans did not need to destroy every ship. They just needed to ensure the Vraxians never felt safe, never got rest, never had a moment of peace. The battle lasted 18 hours. When it finally ended, the Vraxian fleet had lost over 1,000 ships. The survivors fled the solar system, many of them damaged and barely spaceworthy. The human fleet had been almost completely destroyed. Of the 300 ships that started the battle, only 47 survived, but they had won. Against impossible odds, with inferior technology and fewer numbers, humanity had defeated the largest military fleet in galactic history. On Earth, people celebrated in the streets, but in the military command centers, leaders knew the truth. They had won the battle, but the war was not over. The Vraxians would be back. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next year, but eventually, they would return. Unless humanity made sure they would not dare. 3 days after the battle, a fleet of human ships cobbled together from Vraxian wrecks and Earth technology left the solar system. They were heading for Vraxian colony worlds with a simple message, recorded in every language the humans could translate. This is a message.